Hello, 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 all of our warriors today in the arena. I am Marlena Gross Taylor, founder of EduGladiators, and I could not be more excited to have not only two of my favorite warriors in this conversation with me today, but I couldn't be more excited as I was looking through some of the tweets and some of the Voxer messages and just messages and phone calls that I've had all day today about the need to have conversations tomorrow with our kids about I call it political anarchy that happened and is still happening today. So before we jump into that, let me introduce my two core warriors today that's joining me in this conversation to help provide ideas, strategies, and just be an awesome thought partner for you as well as for me, because I've learned so much already in our little pre-show talk around how we talk about this for tomorrow with our students. So first up, Paul, you want to let everyone know who you are? I have Paul O'Neill here from Jersey.
Hi, folks. My name is Paul O'Neill, and I'm a supervisor of instruction from New Jersey. I am the founder of #PLN365 and a proud core warrior with Marlena and the EduGladiators. And Marlena, I thank you so much for inviting me to join you and Desiree for this very important talk today.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, Paul's been with me kind of from the start, and I just love to see all the things that's happening. He also has a podcast that's out too, so he'll definitely talk about how to do that at the end. And if you're listening and watching, whether you're live on Twitter or in our Facebook group, The Arena, that's our community group, or on our YouTube channel, which we haven't been as active, and we're changing that this year. Please feel free to comment below. We can see it. We'll shout you out. I see Rochelle on there. Rochelle's another core warrior. So be sure to drop your comments, drop your questions as we're talking, say hi, and we'll recognize you for sure. All right. So next up, I have Desiree, Dr. Desiree, here with us from Louisiana. Okay. So, I'm already loving this conversation. Another homegirl.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Desiree Alexander. I am the founder, CEO of Educator Alexander Consulting, and also work for an educational nonprofit here in Louisiana.
Awesome.
So happy to be here. This is such an important conversation, and I saw it, flash on my Twitter, and I was like, yes. So thank you for having me in this conversation.
Absolutely. I will say that our streaming service that we're using today, if you're joining in the arena from the Facebook group, if you would, and you're saying, hey, please put in your name because it's not showing me who's saying what. I can see it from some of the Facebook posts, but just let me know who you are so I can make sure I see you, especially if I'm not following you, which we need to correct on Facebook. I may not be able to see your name on the comments, but anyway, we are going to hop right in. We're going to get started. And before we jump into all of the questions, we have 4 questions, very similar to how we do our chat every Saturday morning. We have 4 questions to kind of help ground our conversations and what we're trying to share and make sure that we touch on today. But I just want to talk about with you, Desiree and Paul, as moved as I was enough to even say, hey, we need to have a conversation now about this to help our warriors tomorrow talk about this with our kids, I don't even know what to call it. What would you call what happened and what is still happening right now today?
Well, that's a lot to process.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's different, terminology and verbiage that we could call it, but I mean, I just really look at it as an act of terrorism, an act of homegrown terrorism.
That's a great start. I heard on the media they called it an assault on the Capitol building, and it's unprecedented. It's something that our country hasn't experienced. And when we think about turning the calendar page away from 2020, and there were so many events in 2020 that, coronavirus obviously was, got the top billing, and then, social justice might have shared that as well. We saw a lot of violence, in the social justice world and social justice movement. But as we turned the page, I think there was a lot of hope, and hopefully there still is hope for 2021. But this is the first big event of 2021. Like, this is the start that we're off to. And I think that's why it becomes so important to discuss tomorrow. And a great place to start is with our staff. Our staff is going to have different levels of readiness for this. I was talking with a colleague about this chat about an hour ago, and they were still unaware that this was going on. It's very easy to get caught up in your own world, especially you're dealing with coronavirus, you're dealing with quarantines in your school buildings, you're dealing with quarantines in your community, you're dealing with sickness, you're dealing with death, things of that nature. It's easy to get caught up in all of that. And now you have to start, with people who haven't had time to maybe fully digest this, and they're going to be faced with a lot of questions. They're going to be faced with a lot of confusion. They're going to be faced with a range of emotions. So I think that's where the conversation starts. And, then we go from there.
And I would have to say, even if your school doesn't have a leader that will step up to have that conversation, if you don't have a leader that will step up to say, well, let me take care of my staff, first before they get into the classroom with the students, I still think it's on the teacher to have this conversation in their classroom. And I think there's a nice comment, I'm just going to say J. Tristan Hall, that says, ask students, how do you define this? And I think that's a nice jumping off point, especially depending on the age range of your students. But the thing is, even if you have younger students, they are still soaking this all in. They're still soaking it up. They can't help but. And one thing that you said, Paul, when you said, we as adults haven't had time to process it, I see a lot of people on social media comparing this to the feel of September 11th. And I was student teaching at that time, and, it happened while we were in the class, it happened while we were at the school. So, I mean, even thinking about not having time to process something, but you still have to kick in and say, I have the answers. This is not like a question and answer where I'm going to give you the answers to everything, but we have to give our students this space to discuss and to work out those feelings, even if they're working it out with us.
That's such a great point. And the other piece that I ask too, I wonder, based off of what you just said, is does this conversation need to be a one and done? Should it be a one and done? Of course not. You're shaking your head, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. So, maybe tomorrow for staff, whether they're guided by leadership or not, or an outside influence or not, but it's a great place for staff to do a formative assessment, to find out where students are with this, what they've seen, what they haven't seen, what they think, how involved they are, how informed they are. And then, that also gives a little time to find out, what the appropriate entry points are for conversation moving forward.
I love that. And Jay Tristan, thank you so much. I think that's a great point, is to ask our kids, like, how are they doing? I think if just starting out tomorrow, but just asking that question, like, a lot happened yesterday. How are you feeling right now? And I think from the smaller the kids are, whether you're using, especially if you're virtual, whether you're using like cards to say like, a happy face, a smiley face, whatever, whatever strategy you might be doing to check in with the social emotional health of your kids anyway, I think that's a great place to start. So you're not scrambling as a teacher, as a leader, to figure out like, okay, what can I do tomorrow? Do I have to like, have complete understanding around this framework to ask these questions, and just ask them, how are they doing? What are they feeling right now? And what questions that they have, and being okay not knowing the answers to their questions, to just acknowledge and say, what, thank you so much for sharing that. I don't have all the answers. Sometimes adults don't have all the answers, but I'm going to work, and we're going to work together to find the answers. I think that is a fantastic starting point. in this conversation. So for all of you that are watching, please, as we're just talking, I would love to hear how you would even define today. I know for me personally, I have the, and I do say privilege to not only split my time between, being in the mountains and then also, in Annapolis, in DC. I am so glad that my Black sons are not there in DC right now. One is with me here for the holiday still, and the other is in Nashville with girlfriend. That's a whole nother conversation. We'll talk about that later, but there you go, But I am so glad that my college men aren't in DC right now, because I would have to be in DC with them. And I've told them to stay home and, just lie low right now, because the tension and just how everyone is so divided right now. Just as a mother, my mama bear is coming out, and I want to protect them. I want to protect them and keep them safe. But
if I can kind of talk about what you
please.
just said, I think that's even, again, depending on the age range of your students, that's a good discussion. I don't remember a time, and maybe I'm just being, I'm not thinking through enough, but I don't remember a time in my history. I'm 42, I think. I'm horrible. I know when I'm 4, then after that, it's I don't know. One of those numbers fall behind it, but I think I'm 42. And I don't remember a time in my history where, because of a political election or because of that, it was stay home. Is it it's changing our whole culture, right? It's now verdicts came in for murder trials and things like that, and it was okay, things may get dicey, but I've never remember for a political election being afraid to be out in the street. And so I think even that is a good point of discussion. How is this really affecting our day-to-day everyday lives?
Right. And Desiree, I'm 28 forever, hashtag 28 forever for those of you that know me well. So I might be a tad older, but I do remember in Louisiana. I do remember not as vividly as now, but I remember when Louisiana almost elected David Duke, who is, known leader of the KKK, as the governor of Louisiana. And I remember, just lots of conversations happening around that. And I also remember not really wanting to go to LSU because people were being so ugly to Shaquille O'Neal at the time, and Shaq, for those of you that aren't basketball folks, and a couple of other things that were happening. And I remember I don't want to go to a place like that, doing this to Shaq. And I was much, much younger, but not too much, but much younger. And, so it just hasn't happened in most people's lifetimes, even right now, that are in our generation, right? That's in our age range.
And not on a nationwide.
Oh, not nationwide at all.
And Marlena, if I can add to that really quick, aside from it being nationwide, it's so polarizing. That's the other piece, because let's face it, folks, we're talking about today, and there's a lot of feelings that are, some are in shock, some are disappointed, some are disgusted, whatever the case may be. But there are millions that are proud. There are millions that feel like today's actions were justified. So I think that's something that we have to keep in mind when having this conversation. I
agree. So let's jump into our 4 questions. Like I said, we can go in all kinds of directions because today was just so much. It was literally so much. One of my friends was like, I just got to go get Taco Bell and just process. Another friend said they had to take a drink, Well,
there's the solution. Taco Bell and a drink. We're done.
There you go. Right.
Over.
That's it. So let's jump into, we have about 4 questions for all of our viewers watching. And I just I hope these questions help frame how to help you talk about this tomorrow. The first question we'll start out, which we kind of talked about this already around it, but I want to just be super targeted with this question. So our viewers, whether you're watching live right now or the replay, you have some concrete answers and strategies. But why is it important, Paul and Desiree, do you think, that schools and educators actually discuss this tomorrow with students and maybe even with each other?
So it's, first and foremost, in this day and age, there's nowhere to hide. These news stories, it's not just on the 6 o'clock news and then in the late edition, in the morning edition of the newspaper. I'm showing my age here. I'm a little older than you, Desiree, and I'm definitely older than you, Marlena. Now it's on social media, and it's not just on Facebook and Twitter. You could take apps that are a little more popular, like Snapchat and TikTok for kids, and people are talking about it. TikTok's not just about dancing anymore. TikTok, now has become a platform for people to talk about their feelings about a variety of subjects, and make no mistake, this is going to be one of them. So today was a powerful day because it showed us the power of words, and how words can have an impact on people. It showed us about the power of protest, and what protest looks like, especially one way, and, the actions that took place and the results that took place, and also the unintended consequences. There were people that were hurt today. I believe somebody was killed today. It's something that's going to impact so many people differently depending on your point of view. And let's face it, some of these kids have members of their families that are part of law enforcement. Some of them have members of their family that are part of the military or first responders. And those are people that are going to have maybe a different level of readiness for this conversation, because a lot of times when something happens, there's that call to action, where we feel inspired and we go, hey, we've got to talk about this now. Like, now's the time. We've got to do this. But how do we handle students that aren't ready for the conversation yet? And I use that word yet because it's important. It doesn't mean that we avoid the conversation, but it means that we need to prepare for people that might not have the words, or they might still be processing it, before they're ready to hear and formulate their own opinions.
And I think that's why it's so important, at least, to offer the space, not to force it, and that's why I really did like Jay Tristan saying, like, what are you feeling? So I'm not leading it. I'm not saying like, we're going to talk about this and, we're going to talk about this for the whole hour. And then, I'm not leading that discussion. I want you to let me know, like, what are you feeling about this situation that happened, and then being brave enough as an educator to take it from there. So I think just offering that space, and even if it's not, even if it's something that you have to say, okay, well, we'll discuss a little bit more every day, or we'll discuss a little bit more tomorrow. I'm not saying shut down every single thing that you're doing tomorrow and just talk about this the whole time. But I think at least offering that space for students to speak and have a voice and have emotions and ask questions that they may not feel comfortable asking at home, because maybe parents do have a like, this is how I feel about it. This is what it is. And a student may be questioning either way. Like, I don't know, if this was right, or I don't know if this was wrong, and just giving them that space and not actually having the answer to that, but leading them to how can they find those answers for themselves.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very, very true. And then we also have to make sure, we were talking about this a little bit in the pre-show as well, about, what, as a leader, as an educational leader, if you have the title of leadership, whether you are a principal or assistant principal, or a district leader, if you're over the principals, or if you're the superintendent, what are you going to say to the adults? Like, how do you know that the adults are ready to have this conversation? Because however we might like to think positively about everything, because we're teachers, right? We're teachers first. 70 million plus people voted for Trump, and hundreds of thousands of people today were in DC. So how do leaders address this? And do they, or should they? I think they should. I think if you're not addressing it as a leader, you're being complicit in what happened today. But how do you address it, and address it with your staff? And how do you give them space and give them a way to chat about it if they're not ready, even if they're not ready to have the conversation? Because there's going to be that kid, I don't care if you're virtual or in person, that will say something. They're going to ask the question. And I know that's what I'll be seeing on Twitter in particular, because that's where a lot of us hang out. tomorrow, for sure. Okay, so for those of you that are listening, and again, our first question was, why is it important to have these discussions tomorrow with students? I'll also, one last thought that I have on that I'll add is that if we don't have it, who will? And it leads us to question number 2. Now, question number 2, I actually saw this tweet. I'm gonna look on my phone right here. So if you see me looking down, because I'm 28 forever, ever, I've bookmarked this. I love the bookmark feature on Twitter. But Maria Crutchlow said, she asked how would schools address this, and she talks about, her tweet reads, it has to be talked about in school with facts, history, and reflection, because indoctrination happens in many homes. Now, so the question is, indoctrination does occur. I mean, as schools, we indoctrinate our kids all the time. When I dropped my oldest son off at the Naval Academy 3 years ago, I mean, they were very upfront, like, you're going to be indoctrinated in all the ways of Navy, and how you're going to beat Army for football and all those things too. Like that, they're very, very serious about that. But we do the same thing in our schools. We indoctrinate our kids in our culture. We indoctrinate our kids and best ways to treat each other and to learn. So my question is, based on Maria's tweet that I saw earlier today, is, how do we talk about today's events with facts, with history, with space for reflection, when we know we don't even teach all the history?
That last part of it is so powerful. The history that we teach, who's writing our textbooks, you know what I mean? And this story, decades down the road is going to be in our textbook, maybe before 2030, the newest editions might have this current, reality in our textbooks, 2020, 2021. I think we've got to talk about it with a purpose. We need to have an end game goal of what this conversation is about. What do we hope that the students will be able to do with this information? I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. And when I came up, teachers were more likely or more frequently taught us what to think. Where teaching and learning has shifted now to a point of teaching kids how to think. And teaching kids to reflect and to connect. And perspective is such an important part about it. And Marlena, you mentioned the virtual learner before, and this is a really important piece. And this is where the fear element comes in for many educators, is that they know that parents are on the other end of the screen. And having a conversation like this can be very treacherous territory, especially in families where parents have strong opinions about this, and where maybe parents feel like what was done today was just, and what was done today was righteous, and what was done today was patriotic, and some of the words that have been used in the media and on social media. So facilitating that conversation is so important. And then one of our members had said, asking questions, or our chat members said asking questions was an important piece to see where kids are and what they're thinking about it, and what they know about it, to gather that background knowledge and then to build from there. So I think care, sensitivity, and purpose is a great place to start.
And I would build on that, because anytime I hear words like indoctrination, it always makes me kind of giggle a little bit, because it's such a word that is defined by your perspective, right? We say, oh, indoctrination. Well, I've heard, oh, teachers are indoctrinating students to be liberal. And then I've also heard, teachers are indoctrinating students to be progressive. So it really depends on, that's the type of word that really you use it to prove your own point. And I think that's one of the things, and it's hard. I'm not saying this is easy, but it's one of those things as educators that we cannot do. Like, we cannot prove our point. I think the key word in your question answers the question, and that's using facts, right? Facts are not debatable. Like, facts are facts. Mm-hmm. So I think that is, that's one of those things that you can always count on facts, because you can say like alternative facts and facts depending on the, no, if It's either a fact or it's not. So we need to change our language around that. It's either a fact or it's not a fact. So if we are actually using the facts when, no matter what the student viewpoint is or the student's question is, if we're teaching them how to, determine what is fact from fiction, what is fact from opinion, and using those facts to actually build their opinions, to change their opinions, to create their opinions. I think that is everything when it comes to something like this. Because then you can't say that, well, I'm, Dr. Desiree Alexander is putting her opinion out to my students and using my position to have my students feel a certain way. Well, no, we looked at the facts. Like, is this that simple? A student asked a question or a student brought up a point. We looked at the facts and we went from there. So I think that is crucial.
Well, and do we not teach that in school where we are telling our kids, like, if you're running a persuasive, and I taught language arts, if you're running persuasive paper, you state what your theory is, and then you back it up with facts, right? And you have to cite your sources. You have to vet your sources to make sure that, and this is a word that never existed 4 years ago, you're not including alternative facts.
I was just about to say that. It's a scary world because now facts are certainly can be alternatives. So,
which is like a lie.
We have a whole new battle in facts.
Yeah, I'm reading the chat, ladies, and I see that Kenneth Vaughn said we have to remember to not make it personal and to keep the students at the forefront. Our opinions are ours, and that's so true. We're in such a rush as a society to label things. To label things as with an adjective, or to label things with a number, or to label things with a name. When we all know, one of my favorite sayings we all know is labels are for soup cans. They're not necessarily for people or for events, and one of our edu-gladiators who couldn't be with us tonight, he's celebrating his daughter's 18th birthday. Dennis Griffin asked for Marlena, for you and I to say on his behalf, let's stop saying that what is happening is crazy. It is not. Saying it's crazy justifies the behaviors and desensitizes us to what's really happening. And it's so true. Like when you say things like, this is crazy, this is unbelievable, this is unreal. We saw a lot of things in 2020. We watched a man die, after being under the knee of a police officer for nearly 9 minutes. I think that's why that singular incident was so powerful for so many, because it made George Floyd the face of police brutality. And when we all know that George Floyd was by far not the first, and he certainly won't be the last, person of color that was either abused or killed by the police.
And it's all about the language, right? Like we keep acting like, besides the pandemic, 2020 was not new, right? It was not new, and like we keep acting, and I understand it was new for some. Let me not generalize. It was new for some, but it wasn't new. Okay, so every time I hear like, oh, 2020 civil unrest, I'm like, that. Where have you, like, what are you doing? Because that is not, it wasn't new in 2020. This didn't just come up. This didn't just happen 4 years ago. Like, all of this has been here. But I think that with certain events that happen in our recent history, a virus, I kept calling it a virus. I'm like, a virus has been introduced. And you cannot cure a virus overnight. You can't cure it with an election. You can't cure it with a new law. Like, you cannot cure a virus. So when people do say like, this is crazy, this is unimaginable, where have you been? Like, why is this so crazy? Why is this so unimaginable? What? Like, it's not. It's really not. It's just a progression of what has been going on. So that's why I love, Paul, when you said, this is not a one and done discussion. Hopefully you already have been creating this safe space to discuss. Hopefully this is just another thing to discuss. But if you haven't, then this is your time to get started.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Oh gosh, there was so much there. Desiree, I'll start backwards a little bit, because when you said, hopefully you've already created this safe space, it immediately reminded me of when we all had to go into virtual setting in the spring because of COVID, right? Because we were, generally speaking, painting with the broad brush here. We all were saying, oh, we're super 21st century and we're teaching online and virtual and doing all these cool things. And COVID really shined a spotlight that no, we were not. We were not doing that very well. Now we have pockets of it. We have pockets of teachers, pockets of schools, maybe even pockets of districts. But overall, no, we did not. We were not doing that well. And so I think that caused a lot of angst with just the instruction, right? And where kids are right now. And I think the same thing could be true here. If you have not provided or created that safe environment, you're going to feel it tomorrow. You're going to feel it tomorrow. Because I want kids to ask. I want parents to ask teachers in schools and ask, and I don't care what color they are, all colors, like, what are you talking about? How are you going to talk about this with their kids? Even if they, like you guys were saying, may be on one side or the other. It doesn't matter. Like, they need to be asking because we need to be having the conversation. And Paul, thank you for mentioning that about Dennis. Dennis, happy birthday to your daughter. I think that is so true. And I actually corrected someone today that kept saying like, oh, it's crazy. We need to stop saying it's crazy because we are absolutely normalizing it. For those of you that might follow me on social media, and it's M. Gross Taylor, really easy to find. I was pretty forward today about like how I felt about it. And as I was getting ready to release my one word, and I've been struggling between two words, you know, it was either going to be hopeful or unapologetic. I mean, and I knew I should have gone with unapologetic to begin with, but after today, I was like, yeah, this, let me just make a couple of adjustments on my blog post because my word is unapologetic because we have to be unapologetic and we can't be fearful to have these conversations. And it's not about trying to get people to think our way or not, but I've experienced this vividly for the last couple of weeks. When you start with the facts, when you start with the history, you will see how many people don't know their history because, again, we don't teach all the history. And for all of my curriculum people there, you know how book selection works from the State Department to the district, okay? So you know we don't teach it all. And we're feeling the effects of that right now. We're feeling the effects of that. So when you're having conversations and you start, which I think is right, stay with the facts, stay with the history, it makes people that feel like that felt today was totally valid, right? It makes them question because they're like, they don't know their history. And if they Google it, because that's what they do, then they're like, well, shit, she's right. You know, like that is exactly right. Like I might need to do some research on this, and it makes people uncomfortable. But we all have to be uncomfortable or comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes, that's
talking about things like this. I've said that for years. Way before Emmanuel had the uncomfortable conversations with the Black man. I love his work that he's doing. I've said this for years. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that goes both ways, because when you start with your facts and history and you reflect, we're repeating it. And I did see on Twitter, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Manisha Sinha. Her Twitter handle is PROFMSINHA. She, many others did as well. Tanisha Shaw, Jeffrey Austin, they were citing facts from history where this has happened before. And if you don't know that, this happened during Reconstruction. And that's when all of the federal support was pulled, the Freedmen's Bureau. We don't even talk about that anymore, right? And I taught social studies, American history. We don't even talk about that as in our books, in our textbooks. When Reconstruction happened and the Freedmen's Bureau was sent to make sure that the rights of these newly freed slaves were protected, this exact thing happened with the white Southerners. And they used violence. They tried and was successful in using intimidation to have the federal government withdraw. And that's exactly what happened. And as soon as they withdrew, we now then had the Jim Crow laws. Look it up, look at your facts, because that is true. So we can't say anymore, it's okay, this is crazy. No, we need to say like, this is unacceptable and I'm going to do, right? Like whatever that action is, that's where we have to go. We're going to move on to our third question. And before I do, I want to say one thing about, one more thing about social media. You talk about, Paul, about people looking, I think it was you, Paul, about people looking on social media and TikTok, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say this very clearly, because a lot of people don't realize this. I mean, I have a couple of businesses online. I understand marketing pretty deeply. I'm not the expert by any means because it's always changing. So you're always learning. One thing I do know is that the more of the things that you watch, whether you watch the whole video, whether you watch the full TikTok, whether all of that, the algorithms feed us because it thinks, the algorithms of all social media thinks like, well, hey, this person liked this or watched this or clicked on this, so they must want more of it. So please don't let yourself become a victim of the single story or single stories of what you see just on social media.
And I was just about to say that when you said that people Google for facts, and as soon as my head said, no, they just go to social media. Like my head, like as soon as you said, like they Google for facts, I'm like, they don't even do that anymore. Like they just go to their Facebook, go to their TikTok, go to their Insta, go, and they have this homogenous group of friends who all think the same way. And the algorithm is giving them the same news articles and the same, and that's where their facts come from. So I feel like it's even worse than just Googling for facts. It's just, yeah.
I agree. So to me, if we're not teaching digital literacy, if we're not elevating that as a priority, along with teaching our history, particularly our civics, right, then we are failing our kids, because they are looking at whatever they see on TV or they see on their social media. They're not vetting their sources and they think that is true. And they don't realize how this all works. I mean, come on, we can't even get our kids to have protections around their social media accounts, right?
Well, adults don't understand how it works. So when you're talking about like I feel like we need to educate some of the adults first. And I think that's why some adults and, even educators don't find that important, because they don't understand how it works.
I love that. And some of our Facebook group is saying, I can't see, for whatever reason, I can't see who's saying it. So if it's you, comment again and put your name. It says that we need to be and teach how to be critical consumers of information. I love that. How do we become critical consumers? And that adults need that as much as our kids. We have to understand that first. So I love it. 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 Okay, we have 2 more questions and we have about maybe 10, 12 more minutes. So I want to honor everyone's time because I want everyone to really think back, look at this. We'll share out the YouTube video replay of this so you can take another look. But third question, the Confederate flag. This one got me just personally as well, because I'm in a place where racism there's just not enough Black people to really understand that there is even racism here. The Confederate flag was flown today by Trump protesters, and I put it on my story on my fleets for Twitter, as well as my IG and Facebook. And it was flown inside the Capitol building and also outside. And there was one reporter said that never in the history of our country has a Confederate flag flown inside the building. And that happened today. What message does this send to our Black students, our brown students, and our white students?
I think it sends a variety of messages based on the recipient, based on the person's experience. And what I found to be interesting, I was reflecting and I was thinking, the district that I work in is 95% white, so it's very common that an entire class is going to be full of students who are white. And it may be a very singular view, whether that view, regardless of what that view looks like regarding the Confederate flag. But what I found more interesting was I wondered how does that conversation go when students that are Black or students of color have strong feelings about the Confederate flag? And so do white students. But those strong feelings sound very different, where one side feels that there is a lot of harm and hatred behind the symbol, and the other side feels like there's a sense of pride. What does the conversation sound like then? And I think that's what keeps educators up at night and makes them worry about days like tomorrow, about how do I have this conversation, and what if somebody says something inappropriate? What do I do? I would encourage educators, there's one little piece, Desiree, to finish. I would encourage educators to have that conversation and to treat inappropriate comments just like you would treat any other inappropriate comment, and you give it attention. You give it attention and you make it a teachable moment, and you say that comment is unacceptable. That comment is not appropriate. You know, that we don't speak that way, and here's why. And you use it as a teachable moment.
So I guess I would question that. I think I wanted to talk about a class that I actually witnessed, who I think did a brilliant job of handling that. But when you say, you know, that comment was inappropriate, what comment would you say that to?
So if somebody was talking about the Confederate flag, and maybe they would talk about it from a sense of pride and saying, you know, the Confederate flag being flown inside the Capitol building yesterday was patriotic, you know, or was something for us to be proud of. You know, there's a lot of feelings to be associated with the Confederate flag. And if you do your research and you do your history, you do your work, you know, behind the scenes, you can find out the history of that flag and really have a better understanding of what that flag stood for.
And that's why I asked, because I feel that that's where, you know, when you're trying to create this safe space in education, and I do agree with you that is what keeps, you know, teachers up at night, because you don't want it to get out of control. You don't want it to be harmful versus helpful, and you also don't want to put too much of your opinions in it, right? And doctrine. So that's why I asked that, because I think that's where it comes from. And you took it back to exactly what I said earlier, and you have to get to the facts, right? That's the only way for someone to not come back at you and go, well, we do feel like it's prideful, and you told my baby that that's not fair. Is saying, okay, hold on, let's look at the facts behind that statement you just made about pride. Let's look at the facts behind why our Black students are feeling that this is a symbol of hate. Let's look at where these feelings come from. Let's look at the history behind it. And I think that's everything. Like I said earlier, I'm going to repeat myself now, but that's what I was trying to kind of get to, is it's really all about the facts behind it. And someone said in the Facebook, in the one of the comments, that you have to set up, my mind just went blank, but you have to set up, you know, rules and procedures for these discussions in order for it to be a safe place. You have to set up norms, right, in order for it to be a safe space. And I'll never forget, I was monitoring a school, and I went into a classroom, and they were talking about the election, and it was before this election. It was like the last election, and they were talking about the election, and you know, there were people like very much on this side and very much on this side, and I was just like, oh, this is going to be a hot mess. And I was just kind of sitting in the back, and you can tell that this teacher had set up this space to where you can say your opinion, you can, you know, express yourself, but we're going to come back to it, and you have to put some facts behind it. Like you have to. So it was so interesting to see, like, you know, students on opposite sides, and they were discussing, and then he would just ask a question like, you know, like, what was that fact behind that? And if a student can answer it, you need to go look that up. Like, you need to come bring this tomorrow and and it was just such a, like, you can see, like, they didn't seem to leave angry or anything like that. Like, they left like, okay, well, I'm gonna try to prove my point, you know, with facts tomorrow. And I was like, yes, this is what we want, because we're creating not only critical thinkers, but we're creating, empathy. We're creating, looking at a situation from multiple angles. I was like, this is it.
That's a great point too. The multiple perspectives, it creates a different range of outcomes now, because, people say perspective is reality, and it's true, but perspective is shaped from your reality. And when you've only got your perspective to lean on, then you've got a very narrowed view of the world and how people interact with it.
Agree, because I'm not going to look for facts if I think what I'm saying is fact.
Correct.
Exactly. So your perception is reality until somebody challenges it.
Right. So is the question then, because this will come up for teachers and leaders tomorrow, I guarantee you, because it's trending on Twitter. Kids are seeing it. It's all over. I try to stay 28 forever and keep up what's trending on not just Twitter, but on Snapchat, on TikTok. So they're going to be asked this question. So is the real question, before we can think about what the messaging means and how do we have this conversation, our teachers need to be trained in how to have these conversations. Our leaders need to be trained. We need to give resources to our parents how to have these tough conversations.
And it's far past due. You know what I mean? Like, we can't be trained tonight for tomorrow. This training should have been going on for a long time, but I'm going to go back to something that Desiree said before, when she talked about maybe leadership not guiding teachers, to have this conversation. And I encourage educators to not wait for the professional development to come in, to not wait for the articulation session or the round table to happen, because if you wait, you're going to wait your whole career and you're going to retire. And in many cases, it's not going to happen. So we live in a world right now where on social media, there's opportunities for professional development and articulation 24/7, 365 at the touch of a fingertip. Whatever you're looking for, you can find. And granted, you'll have to sift through some of that, because there is a little bit of, digital responsibilities that you need to have to know, what's legitimate and what's not. But it's up to us to diversify our consumership, of reading different authors and listening to different speakers, and making sure that the people that you listen to don't all sound like you, and don't all say the same thing as you, and don't all look like you. It needs to be a variety of speakers, in order to understand and grow and learn about different messages.
Well, and also for those of you that don't follow Sheldon Aikens, he is amazing. He has an Equity Virtual Summit that's coming up. This is like his, I think maybe his second year doing it, second or third year doing it. And we've had him on EduGladiators. He's definitely a friend of EduGladiators. He has a free summit that's coming up that you definitely should look at. And we'll retweet it as well, and also post in the comments after today's over. And then even for EduGladiators, we've started to offer more of those types of things. So keep on the lookout for that, from our equity audit to of our curriculum to also offering more support and courses and classes for this. I agree with you, Paul. We can't start and expect folks to have it done tonight. So I want to just remind us back to the very first thing we talked about, is just starting out very simple with, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Jay Tristan mentioned that. My favorite friend from Nantucket, Tracy, I think, said similar things in our Facebook community. But we have to learn, though. We can't just say, oh, I just don't know enough about it. I don't want to hurt feelings. We know enough as educators on how to set procedures and how to have discussions. We always can learn to get better, but we can't not have that discussion tomorrow for fear of, well, I don't know exactly what to say. Just start there. Give your kids a moment to write. Maybe do a flip grid. I mean, there's so many different things you can do. Let your kids take the lead tomorrow, but you as EduGladiators have to start building your capacity, building the tools in your tool belt, so you can navigate these conversations and take advantage of things like what Sheldon's doing, what EduGladiators have started doing, whatever it might be, right? Like, you have to start doing that, and making sure that you're involving your community when you're ready to start having these, Now is the time. It's not a matter if you're ready to start having them. You have to involve your community and your parents. So we probably need to alter from our and I say this jokingly, but it's kind of like the bane of my existence, literacy night, math night, multicultural day. That's not the same thing. And we need to have some serious trainings for our parents and our families and our communities. All right, last question. And we are just about out of time. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this has been valuable to you. And again, we will share the YouTube link so you can watch it again. And share it, please. Last question. So since No Child Left Behind, which I'm really telling my age now because I've been doing this for over 20 years now, but since No Child Left Behind, the focus has been on literacy and math. And as a former social studies teacher and English teacher, that was really hard for me. And I even taught math. I just don't lead with that. But I did teach math as well. But it was really disheartening as my family moved from state to state because it was harder to keep my social studies for the state history that we might have lived in, to keep that up to date. I could still do the American history. But how has that singular focus on literacy and math, even today, you're judged by literacy and math, maybe some states your science for chemistry. How has that singular focus on literacy and math cultivated an environment that was ripe for today's, and I do mean this, anarchy behavior in our country?
You know, sometimes I feel like we lost the focus on the whole child. And I don't know if it's the world of high stakes, standardized testing, you know, or it's school scores, you know, who gets the most funding, you know, has the highest box score, so to speak. We got away, instead of raising human potential and raising better people, we focused on raising the bar, you know, and it became a specifically numeric metric that became the judgment day for how good of a job we're doing, you know, and that's a scary place to be. So one of the things I wanted to add from the chat was one of the Facebook users said, while we're waiting the creation of safe space, what's happening to those individuals who are not safe? Safe spaces are often a privilege for many and further isolates marginalized communities. That safe space terminology, while it's well-intentioned, I don't think it's meant in a harmful way. It makes me twitch, because I really feel like if you're waiting for a space to be safe, what happens if someone doesn't ever feel safe in that space, no matter how hard you try to make it safe? Then they're never going to have that conversation. They're never going to feel accepted. They're never going to feel understood or welcome. So the terminology that I like to use is a place that welcomes, you know, whether it's welcomes conversation, welcomes perspective, welcomes opinion, welcomes wonder. You know, those are the pieces that we really need to focus on. And that's how we'll grow from these conversations. You know, not about going in tomorrow and going, I have the perfect lesson. I have the answers. I'm going to use, you know, yesterday as a watershed moment to teach about X concept. You know, this is about finding out where your audience is, where your students are, and then finding out where you feel they need to be. And what's the most powerful and impactful thing that they can take away from this and be able to apply it to make better sense of the world today.
And my quick answer to the Nickleby kind of dropping the history viewpoint, I guess I would have to say it's almost, I don't know how to say it. Like, this is so institutional that I don't feel like that. Like, I feel like that question, I'm like, and like, you know, I just kind of feel like I feel like that wasn't the start of the problem. It's not, you know, it's kind of, so that's where I kind of feel like that question, I'm like I feel like if I was in a different space right now, I would like try to be polite and answer it. And I'm just like that's not where this started, right? Like, no. That's not, you know, it's almost like one of those little excuses we like to pick and try to solve the little excuse when this is so institutional and this is so deeper than, what Nickleby decide to focus on, and what, I do like Paul's answer that goes a little bit deeper of not teaching the whole child. But even if we go back to the 50s and 60s, when we weren't all test driven, we were still having the civil rights movement, right? And so it's so institutional that trying to pick the little things to focus on. I think that's what we do a lot in the world in general and in education. Until we get deeper and we start talking about deeper issues, that's throwaway, thoughts, and just to kind of hone in and then out, because I know we're running out of time. Like one of the things that when we talked about digital learning, and they were saying, well, schools are places where students come to feel safe, and schools are places where students come to eat. And I'm like, yes, all of that is true, but why are we upset at that and we're not upset at those facts? Like, we got to start digging deeper. Like, why are we not upset that is a fact that students come here to eat? Why are we not upset that this is where students come to? Like, we need to dig deeper into our societal issues, and that's not going to happen overnight. And I know that's hard to think about, and then we won't sleep and things like that. But if we don't dig deeper and start having some deeper conversations, all this little stuff is a drop in a bucket.
Yeah. And, when I was coming up with that question, that I did think exactly what you said, Desiree. Like, that's not the start of it, but I do know that is a common excuse or a common focus. And I wanted us to be able to call it out. And I'm sorry, my dogs are just underneath me right now. They're barking and whining at the door. But that is a common misconception that we do need to talk about, because these injustices, the lack of equity were in place far before No Child Left Behind, and I think that is something worth calling out. I know for me, what I thought about with this question was that because we do not focus on history, particularly civics, right? Like, you might have half a semester in high schools, and I've taught and worked in 6 states now. A half a semester, you barely have it in 8th grade and maybe in 11th grade. And even if you take AP Push in 11th grade, I don't think we focus enough on the civics piece. But had we done that, then a lot of today I feel deep in my heart, wouldn't have happened to the extent that it did, because the American citizens that were doing what they did today would know the rules and the law and how we should be. And they would know, like, well, there's no point in doing that because this is the law. For instance, the vice president, his role today was purely ceremonial, all the things. Like, you don't have to be a lawyer to know that, because we should have been teaching that. And so my wonder is, would that have offset some of what happened today? And I don't know. But what I do know is we're out of time. And I feel like Whoopi from The View. And we've had a wonderful, there you go. Thanks, pup. We've had a wonderful conversation today, and tonight, I should say. And I hope that everyone listening and that's watching or rewatching or resharing would definitely consider and advocate for having this conversation tomorrow with your colleagues. Again, it doesn't matter if you're virtual or not. And most definitely starting off very simply with asking your students how they feel and giving them that space to reflect and process. Any last thoughts on this before we close out? And I'll start with you, Desiree.
Yeah, I'm really just want to thank you for having this conversation and inviting me to be a part of it, or having me be a part of it. I appreciate it. Thank you. I don't want to talk anymore, because then we'll go into something else.
No, you're absolutely fine. And then Paul?
Absolutely. Let's do this again. Definitely an opportunity, I feel like, for us to think, and using Dennis Griffin's hashtag, here to make you think. We're not here to change the way you think, but we're certainly here to make you think. And I think that conversation did that. And my man, Corey Radish, we're starting a podcast together, the Status Grow podcast. He says in the chat, I'll leave off with this. It's great words. We need to create the dialogue because the inequities we see inside of schools continue outside of schools. So we'll definitely be discussing that more on the Status Grow podcast, which is coming. First edition, January 21st. Just follow hashtag PLN365 and hashtag Status Grow for more details. Marlena, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed myself tonight. And Desiree, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thanks to everyone that was listening in today. And Paul and Desiree, Paul, I know you gave your plug in about the podcast, which I'm so excited about. And just PLN 365 chat on Tuesdays, I believe, still on Tuesdays, which is amazing. How can people, just to be again clear, how can people get in touch with you, Paul? And then Desiree, please tell folks how they can get in touch with you if they want to pick your brains a little bit more.
So I love learning, and I learned something before the chat even started. Desiree not only put her title, but she put her address on the bottom too. And I was like, what a genius idea. So as Marlena's logging in, I'm furiously typing in my Twitter handle. So it's right there underneath my picture at Paul O'Neill 1972 is where you can find me on Twitter. That's where I primarily do business. And then hashtag PLN365 is where you'll most commonly find me at.
Awesome. And then Desiree, what about you?
And you can find all of my information on my website, educatoralexander.com. On Twitter, I'm at Educator Alex. On all other social media, I'm Educator Alexander. And we're having a free webinar this Saturday on Solve in Time, which is a great way to start having these conversations in your classes. So I definitely suggest coming to see that. And you can find the information either on like my Twitter and all that, or on my website under upcoming events.
Awesome. Awesome. And Desiree, if you send that to me, we will make sure that we put that in our Facebook group, on all of our platforms for EduGladiators, because it truly is about promoting the great work that so many of us are doing. That's the whole point of EduGladiators. You don't have to have a gazillion followers in order to have a voice, because we know that when we close that door to that classroom, that's where the magic happens. And that's where we have our greatest impact to not only change kids' lives, but they also change our lives as well. So, and of course, if you're watching, you know how to get in touch with me. This is on the EduGladiators platform, but you can follow me at mgrosstaylor on all my social media. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Our chat is coming up this Saturday, every January for EduGladiators. We always do rethinking discipline. And so you guys will start seeing the promos for that going out starting tomorrow around that. And we talk about rethinking discipline all month long. And there is no way we can think about rethinking discipline if we don't address the adult behavior. So you're going to have more of tonight's conversation and types of questions for this Saturday's chat, because we have to understand our biases. We have to understand how we behave. We have to process all the things that have happened, particularly today, so we can understand how to best help meet the needs of our students and how to make sure we are disciplining them in a way that is fair, that is equitable, and that makes sense. And honestly, that actually should teach them how to be better and not encourage and put kids in that school to prison pipeline. So EduGladiators chat is every Saturday, 8 a.m. Central Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time for questions, 30 minutes. And you won't be the same for sure without it. So thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone that's joining in. And we will also share the replay of this. Until then, we will see you guys in the arena on Saturday.